Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make brief comments on the Statutory Instrument Amendment Bill, National Assembly, Bill number 3 of 2024. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues have already highlighted the dangers of allowing the executive to control legislation. Parliament has been given the power of the purse. And when it comes to the issue of the power of the purse, Parliament is the one that drafts legislation. In fact, in this Senate, we pronounce ourselves through motions and bills. And we are guided by the Constitution. And the Constitution is set there to be able to provide a neater way of ensuring equity. Mr. Speaker, there are so many things that we talked about grandfathering of provisions that existed in the past. One of the things that I've looked at in this bill is that the draft of the bill introduces discipline and makes sure that there are timelines, deadlines of the regulatory making body to be able to set up those regulations. But mischievously introduces now Section 27. And when I was consulting with my colleagues, particularly those who are in the National Assembly, they made me aware of this mischief, which really does not help us in any way. Because, Mr. Speaker, the needs of Kenya in 2013 were completely different from the needs of Kenya today. Mr. Speaker, today we have the movement of the Gen Zs. Their needs are completely different. We have the Gen Alphas, which language some of us may not even understand. So it is imperative, and I think the framers of the Constitution, if you look at Article 94, were quite clear in terms of trying to accommodate the change that will come in future. So now, when the National Assembly introduces this section, which I'm going to read for people to be able to understand it, to demystify further, to say that Section 27 of the Principal Act is amended by inserting the following new subsection immediately after subsection 2. 1. Any statutory instrument that was in operation and that would have otherwise stand automatically revoked on any day before the commencement of this provision shall continue to operate and to have effect as if the instrument had not been automatically revoked on the date. Mr. Speaker, that is the issue of contentious. Why do you set a sunset clause? And I want to demystify further, to go into the Constitution. When it comes to the issue of the Equalization Fund, there is a sunset clause which had already been put there of 10 years. Was it 10 years or something like that? If we now go back and say that we want to do that, we have to amend the Constitution to be able to say, how are the people who live in Narok? Have they been able to have some form of equity with the people who live in Meru? Things are different. So I think, for neatness sake, discipline is welcome. It is important to make sure that the bill, whenever there is any delay on implementing any laws that are passed by Parliament, Parliament is made aware. And there are consequences. Because if you are told that you must set up regulations, there is nothing wrong, Mr. Speaker, with rigidity and accountability. Laws must be rigid for us to be able to have some form of continuous or other development. But now, when you now come and say that laws that were pre the new constitution or regulations that lapsed, that now we just continue doing that, that's a shortcut. Bring them back to Parliament. Let us have a conversation subjected to public participation, And where we see that the needs have already changed in terms of those regulations, we adopt the current changes. Mr. Speaker, if you look at what is happening now, as a good example with the laws on motor vehicles, there are regulations which are being introduced, clear regulations by NTSA, stating that, look, everyone who drives a car will now be required to have an inspection sticker annually. That is something completely different. It is new. We are copying other nations. There is also an economic aspect in it. There is an economic cycle which is being introduced. One that says now private entities can be able to have those inspection centers, so that either you share the cake or you make it easy for everyone to be able to access. What we were yesterday is not what we are today. Our circumstances of yesteryears are different from the circumstances of today. So I think this clause is mischievous, and it is important that all of us are aware that these regulations are the one that determines investments into this country, how they come. If there are particular or certain regulations, let's say with the Central Bank of Kenya, or regulations by different pieces of laws that would otherwise require investment to be done in a different way now, but were much friendlier before, when we introduce this clause, you then now go to the previous prerequisites, which most of them may not even be very difficult to be able to achieve than the ones of today. Mr. Speaker, we all know that we are living on borrowed times, but on these borrowed times, we should be aware of any piece of legislation that we draft. It's got consequences, those which are directly intended. And if you look at the intended consequences in this amendment, is to bring in discipline, rigidity, accountability when it comes into the issue of enacting legislations and regulations. But there are unintended consequences. The unintended consequences are the ones which are being mischievously introduced in amending Section 27 of the Principal Act. Leave Section 27 of the Principal Act intact. Bring all those regulations that have lapsed back here. We have the Delegated Legislation Committee. Let the Delegated Committee go through them, see whether the circumstances have changed. Then by doing so, subject it to public participation, let Kenyans be aware. There is this debate that people talk about Kenyans objecting to everything. But it's because we are wiser now, much wiser than we were yesterday. It makes us question everything. Mr. Speaker, today is a Wednesday. And those whiskey drinkers, the ones who drink whiskey on Wednesday, are the ones who are the real whiskey drinkers, because they have a conversation with that drink. Those who drink on Saturday drink either to celebrate the whole week, the achievement of the week, or maybe to celebrate a game that has been won or lost. But those who sit down on a Wednesday still have 2 more days of the week, Mr. Speaker, to be able to ask. So that whiskey is asking you, what are you running away from this time? You're still trying to figure out how you're going to solve the challenges of Thursday and Friday. So that you cannot compare, Mr. Speaker. You cannot compare a whiskey drinker on a Wednesday and a whiskey drinker on a Saturday. Saturday is celebratory. It's a day to rest. Wednesday is a day to think and reflect and say, how am I going to carry out my duties on Thursday? How am I going to carry out my duties on a Friday? 2 more days of work. So today is a Wednesday. So those whiskey drinkers, go reflect on what this Senate is talking about when it comes to the issue of legislation. And I know we have a lot of them in the lower house. So today ask yourself, why is it that Senator Mungatana took time and said, no, 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 this is mischievous? You know, why is it that Senator Kajwang took time and said, no, 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 Senator Kina, we should object to this amendment? Why is it that everything else, when it comes to discipline, everyone is applauding the drafters of these amendments? So, Mr. Speaker, I definitely support my colleagues who have taken their time to even educate us. You know, we consult here, we have a conversation. I think I'll be joining you this evening for a glass of whiskey, and we can have a conversation with it. And then maybe it can be able to guide us. Mr. Speaker, it's, you know, point of information, I'd love to be informed, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, my grandfather, my father, and myself do not partake of that Wednesday fellowship. Mr. Olekina is inviting us to the bottle of whiskey. Just to inform him. Maybe Honorable Kajwang can.
Mr. Speaker, that information was very, very important. But like I said, we are living on borrowed times. You know? So, it shouldn't matter how you live your life. It shouldn't matter who loves you or who hates you. It doesn't change who you are. You know? You just get up and move. You know, it doesn't matter how many haters you have or how many people, you know, vote you because they think you're a saint. You know, I talked about a conversation, you know, and I think everything that is happening, Mr. Speaker, now, our forefathers, our parents, went through the same thing, stages. They had those conversations. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, to borrow from one of my favorite artists, you know, being a witness is more than enough. So now we are witnesses of what is happening in this country. Some of the things we like and some of the things we do not like. They always say the majority will always have their way, the minority will have their say. You know, when we come here and we highlight challenges that we are facing, you know, in this lifetime, we will be vindicated if we are not listened to. Because what we need to do is that on these borrowed times that we're living, we must make sure that whatever we do is something that when you sleep or when you are having a conversation with that glass of whiskey in the dark, you can actually be able tomorrow to stand firm and say, yes, I stand by what I did. You know, Mr. Speaker, you know, currently the entire country is in a mood that I cannot even explain. You know, all of us are campaigning left, right, and center. In fact, if you look at the Senate, it's empty. Why? Everybody is trying to seek their votes for you to get back here next year or for you to become a governor or whatever. You know, but we tend to forget what brought us here. The work that brought us here for us to be able to work for our people. So, and there are dangers, Mr. Speaker. You know, right now, very few of us are aware that in the next few months, Mr. Speaker, and I have a statement to that effect, hopefully I'll read it tomorrow, we're about to experience something that has not been experienced in 150 years in this world or on earth, a super El Nino. And we're not prepared, Mr. Speaker. We're not prepared. So hypothetically speaking, if there was a regulation that guided counties on how to prepare for an El Nino, 10 years ago, Mr. Speaker, our forest cover was almost maybe 30%. Now, deforestation, look at, if you go to, we have mudslides. We never used to have mudslide 20 years ago in some parts of Kenya, but now it's a common factor because we have destroyed our forest. So circumstances of yesteryears and today are not the same. So, Mr. Speaker, to conclude, I would like to plead with my colleagues that we take time to understand the consequences, intended and unintended, of any piece of legislation that we pass in this House. Otherwise, I support with amendments.
Senator Eddie Okech.